Over the past 6 months, we have been working on creating a space where people could feel comfortable sharing stories about their identities. After hosting 3 workshops where we invited people to come talk about their mental health, body image, class, queer identities, race, ethnicities, and religions, we gathered 5 storytellers whose true stories you're about to hear. We hope you listen, learn something, maybe feel a connection, and most importantly, enjoy. Welcome to Unlabeled Part 2.
One of the main reasons why I wanted to tell this story specifically is because I just really needed to get it out of my system. I grew up with either entirely white friends or entirely Latina friends, and I could never properly vent out these feelings and these struggles with them to the point where they would be able to comprehend what I've been going through. So I feel like if I don't get this out now, it's just going to keep bubbling and boiling and festering deep inside of me. And then when I'm going to actually let them out, it's not going to be in a healthy manner. And I feel like if one person watches this and starts to understand and comprehend that they are not alone in these kinds of struggles and that their issues are not exclusive to them, then my whole intention behind releasing this story has been a success. So, what are you? The question I dread hearing every time I'm in conversation with someone. A question that, when answered, is always followed up with, "Oh really? What do you identify as more?" Being born into a biracial family with a Latina mother and a white father, I never know the right answer to those questions. Since I'm fluent in Spanish and can easily communicate with my Colombian relatives, people automatically assume that I'm more Latina. But my Polish features and the fact that I grew up around more of my Polish family seems to say otherwise. The first time I was asked the big question, I was in first grade. We were talking about where our families originated from, and when I mentioned that my mother had emigrated from Colombia and my father from Poland, I was asked, "Are you more Colombian or Polish?" I sat there for a moment, unsure of what to say. Was I not both? How can you be more of something that's half of you? No one expects to have an identity crisis at 6 years old, but there I was, questioning why, if I was one half of each, I had to pick one. It's unnerving to feel like you don't have an exact place in your own family. Most of my Hispanic side of the family lives thousands of miles away in their respective countries, and whenever I visit, I begin to feel like the black sheep, an ugly duckling. My light skin and dirty blonde hair contrasted with their coffee-colored skin and dark hair. I never developed their local accents or colloquialisms due to speaking Spanish differently in the ways that we were taught. Unfortunately, it's no better being with the other side of my family. Despite having grown up around my entire immediate Polish family, my ability to relate to them surprisingly ends at my Slavic features. My family had given up on trying to teach me Polish by the time I was 8, and as a result, my visits to Poland were overall unpleasant due to the lack of understanding between me and my relatives. My upbringing was very rocky when it came to American culture as well. When discussing film, music, and all types of media, I began to notice a severe disconnect between me and my peers. While they grew up on classic bands like the Beatles and Queen, I was sitting during long car rides jamming out to Juanes, Chayanne, and Shakira. Heck, I didn't even know who Michael Jackson or Prince were until they died and dominated the news for a few weeks. And the insecurities have carried over to my passions as well. In my theater company, when the time came to cast a young Latina girl, a dark-haired, curly-haired Italian girl was cast because she looked more along the lines of a stereotypical Hispanic person. It's not her fault whatsoever. We're good friends, actually, and every now and then the situation comes up in conversation, and we tend to have a good laugh about it and comment on how messed up it was. But in the moment, it really stung, knowing that even to my white directors, I still wasn't Latina enough to make an impact. It led to insecurities regarding my appearance, to the point where I decided to dye my hair from dirty blonde to black in hopes of feeling and appearing more Latina. My lack of identity also made life as an activist difficult. When discussing racial issues, there would be times where I would question the authenticity of my words. How could I be speaking on matters such as these when I wasn't actually Latina? There was an interaction that I had online where I commented on the usage of a gender-neutral version of the word Latino. Some private troll account ended up responding to my comment, sarcastically saying, "Thank you, white woman, for educating us on our own language." Us? Who is this us? Because last time I checked, I exclusively spoke Spanish until I finally started picking up English at the age of 5. In a world so dependent on the enduring fight between fitting in and standing out, I reside in a strange gray area. I'm ashamed to take any side in fear of my identity being invalidated. There is no such thing as fitting in or standing out racially when you experience both simultaneously. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I've figured everything out, because I haven't. I still feel discomfort discussing my biraciality and severely struggle with finding a box to put myself into. However, my multiculturalism allows me to relate to random customers at my job, whether it be because I ask them about their background or they ask me. So I try. I do my hardest to figure out who I am, and even though it may take a while, I'm sure that eventually I will be satisfied with the outcome.
Hi, my name is Anais Escobar, and I am the writer and performer of I Am Beautiful. I just wanted to give a few words about why I think this piece is important to share, and why I just shared it in general. The main reason is that body image is an issue that is prominent in many people's lives, yet it is not discussed enough. So I'm hoping that by sharing my story and being able to become vulnerable to a big group of people can influence others to begin confronting their past trauma when it comes to body image, and to really open up a forum and a place to feel safe and discuss. Also, this was a great healing process for me to be able to revisit main points in my life that really negatively affected me and positively affected me, and see how I can improve upon that for the rest of my life so I can remain a happy being, because at the end of the day, we just need to be happy. That's the only goal that we should have as humanity. Fat. Notable for having an unusual amount of fat, plump, oily, or greasy matter. Merriam-Webster Dictionary. That doesn't sound too pleasant, right? Unfortunately, I've lived with the unpleasantries that accompanied the word fat. First grade, I was 6. After school, I went to a friend's house on a scorching hot day. Unintelligently, I was wearing long pants. So before we went outside to play, I asked my friend if I could borrow a pair of shorts. When the consent was given, I went to the bathroom to change, but the shorts didn't fit. My knee couldn't even get past the hem of the short that became suffocating to my body the more I pulled. I pulled, but to no avail. They couldn't get up past my stupid, fat, swollen, gross knee. At that age, I didn't understand size, nor should I have. But this moment was forever ingrained in my mind as a marker of my fatness, which I soon naively associated with my ugliness. And from that day on, I saw every girl that matched my friend's skinny build and wanted to be thin like them, aspired to be their kind of beauty, and then I saw my fatness and wanted to get rid of it. 5th grade, I was 9 years old. The doctors told me I was in the 97th percentile of my weight. To lessen this number, I was put in Taekwondo. I was finally engaging in physical activity a few times a week, every week. That was all I was supposed to need. but it didn't work. I grew impatient that I wasn't seeing drastic change. I was still the girl I always was, the girl who was fat, ugly, and undesirable. Later, on a random, weighty day, pun intended, I noticed that as I inhaled a certain way, I could reduce the prominence of my stomach. I was able to seem thin. This habit soon invaded my life. And I think what made this so addicting was that I was able to see fast change. I quickly went from a girl that was too fat for her age, was ugly and undesirable, who couldn't share her clothes, to a girl that looked normal. This habit infiltrated my life and began to feel so normal that it felt wrong not to suck in my stomach. It just felt so good, you know? I was skinny. I knew that I could walk in the street and no one could think of me negatively because I wasn't this ugly, fat, undesirable creature. I knew that I looked like what was deemed as beautiful. This feeling of comfort and conformity was so compelling, I couldn't let go. I couldn't let go. I wouldn't let go, but I had to let go. I had to let go of the reliance I had on living in perpetual discomfort just to seem thin, to seem pretty. Fake it till you make it, right? Well, I faked it for 5 years, yet I never made it in terms of accepting myself. I adjusted my life to be this version of myself, yet here I am sharing this story of its lasting trauma. I was 9 when I made this decision, and I regret it infinitely, as it has spoiled my last few years of authentic youthful innocence. Ninth grade. I was 14. I was in a musical with a small cast of girls. A cast both small in number and stature. I was taller than everybody, but I was also wider than them too. I remember this event fondly. Our director had just received our costumes and we all went to go try it on. Everyone was admiring how cute they looked in their respective costumes, but I was embarrassed that the size I ordered was too snug. By nature of the small room, everyone watched as my director fiddled with my costume, watched as I turned pale with embarrassment because I'm their fat, ugly elephant castmate that was too fat for their costume. I remember feeling so much shame that day. And I internalized that shame because I didn't want to admit to my fatness, because I thought admitting to my fatness would be admitting to my ugliness. And I just wanted to be beautiful. I just wanted to be beautiful. Is that too much to ask for? But my life isn't entirely composed of sob stories, don't worry. In the past 2 years, I have really tried to actively love and embrace the body I was given. 10th grade. I was 15. I had a callback for an audition. Now, normally I would have been so nervous, but that day I walked into that audition with so much confidence. So much of that had to do with the fact that I walked out of my house this morning feeling amazing. I was getting ready, putting on my dress and my sneakers, thinking, wow, I look great. And it's been a while since I said that and genuinely believed it. You know, I saw Chubb peep through bits of the dress, but I thought it was beautiful. Sexy, even. This is actually a funny story because the prerequisite audition for me to get this callback went terribly. I completely bombed. So this was my chance for redemption. And honestly, I don't think it would have gone well if it wasn't for the fact that I walked out of my house that morning feeling like the most confident, the most beautiful girl in the world. And the confidence proved me well. I got into the show, and I made so many friends that day, some being my best friends today. So many successes came from the day when I embraced my natural body. I felt free and open to the world, and I want to keep that feeling forever. Fat. Notable for having an unusual amount of fat, plump, oily, or greasy matter. Merriam-Webster Dictionary. But I left out a few parts. Full in tone and quality, substantial and impressive. Reclaiming the term fat is impossible because it's always been a positive word to claim. Fat does not equal ugly. No definition says that it did. I know that now. This literal definition is a matter of factual observation and positive nuances, never about ugliness. So you can't use it in terms of defining ugliness. I love my big tummy, flabby arms, cellulite-ridden thighs, and plump neck. These perceived flaws are only flaws to those who equate fat to ugly. But fat is beautiful. I am beautiful.
We live in a world where our beauty is decided by social media trends, where our politicians openly value some people over others. It's hard to have self-worth or believe you're beautiful in a society that sometimes makes you feel otherwise. I've had this problem my entire life. I still do. Everyone wants to be accepted and loved, but we have to remember that the acceptance and love that matters the most is our own. We can't control the color of the skin we're born with or our ethnicity, but we can control to embrace ourselves, our ancestors, and our history. The first step is talking about it and to share. Words do make a difference. I was born of two different cultures, two different races, two different religions. I was born split, never completely belonging or understanding who I was. My mom's name is Miriam Lisa, named after Moses' sister. The daughter of a Jewish doctor, she grew up in upper middle class suburgatory. She hated it. She needed to escape. My dad is named Roberto Edmundo, named after his father. He immigrated to America from Honduras as a young child. He grew up poor, surrounded by drunks and gamblers. He hated it. He needed to escape. My dad was searching for conformity. My mom was longing for someone who could make her feel different. They met on the cobblestone streets of Cambridge. They fell in love. They created my brothers and me. Then they drifted apart. And they left me alone, confused, not wanting to escape but needing to belong, to be accepted and loved. Once, when I was in my last years of high school, I was digging through old boxes in my basement looking for a discarded shirt or maybe a pair of pants. To my surprise, I came across some writing of my father's when he was an undergraduate at Harvard. My dad's a mathematician, not the writing type or an emoter. He says it's from all the trauma he faced growing up. Naturally, I was curious and read the piece, even though I knew I shouldn't. He wrote about his girlfriend at the time and listed reasons why she would and wouldn't love him. On both lists was because I'm Hispanic. At that moment, I felt I understood my father in a way I never had before. Maybe that's why he never taught us Spanish. As a child, there were no Latinx in Hebrew school, which my mom forced me to attend. I took on the role of the nice Jewish girl, and that role only. I learned Hebrew. I was bat mitzvahed. I celebrated every major Jewish holiday with my extended family. I knew my history. I honored my religion. I shunned my Latinx side, made sure no one knew it was a part of me. It was easier to leave one identity behind in order to belong. I was ashamed. When I was a child, I was obsessed with skin tones. I analyzed every differing shade I saw in people. I especially liked to compare people to their family members. I inherited the olive-toned skin of my father. My 4 brothers inherited the fair complexion of my mother. I grew up feeling like an outsider in my own family. When my single mother took us on vacations, I feared that strangers wouldn't believe I was related to them because my skin was too dark. People from Honduras aren't white, and I wanted to be white, completely white, like my classmates and best friends, not half white, but one complete identity. I was embarrassed by my culture and the ancestors who fought for me. I thank them for surviving years of injustices by pretending they weren't a part of me. I embraced only one culture completely, because when someone asks you, "What are you?" it's annoying to give them the long-winded explanation of your mixed-raced ancestry. I wanted a place to belong, 100% completely belong. Sometimes when I was little, I wished my mom had married another man, a Jewish man, instead of my father. Later I realized if she had, I wouldn't be here. Some other, completely whole, 100% Jewish girl would. My mom once told me when she was a little girl, she liked to pretend she was the descendant of royalty because of her small bone stature and fair complexion. I wanted to be just like her. In kindergarten, when playing pretend games with my friends at recess, I would describe the person I was pretending to be in great detail. I have blonde hair, blue eyes, braces, reading glasses, and my skin is the same color as my mom's. That was my idea of beauty. I look back at my childhood self and her decisions with sadness. I let the ancestors who look after me down. I grieve the opportunities I missed growing up, to know my culture, to embrace my race, to take pride in my ancestry, to love my identity, my whole identity, not half of it. I soon realized that by denying my race, I was denying myself. By trying to fit in, I made myself believe that me, the whole of me, wasn't good enough. Letter to my abuela. Dear abuela, thank you for praying for me every night, even though we technically don't believe in the same God. Thank you for asking me at every visit how my mom and grandma are, even though your son left that family years ago. Thank you for sending me, without fail, $25 and a card for every birthday, which you always sign with "Bless you." I realize now, by shunning my heritage, I was also shunning you. I was ashamed of you because your life wasn't easy. I regret that. I understand now more than ever that you are an inspiration, the type of woman I should strive to be. You are strong, independent, and kind. You immigrated to America with 3 young kids while your husband stayed in Honduras and slept with another woman. You worked hard to provide for those 3 kids in a country where you didn't even speak the language, so they could have a better future. All 3 of those kids went on to be college graduates and have families of their own. I wish I knew Spanish, so I could speak to you and we could have long and deep conversations. I wish you could tell me what life was like in Honduras growing up, how you felt about your sister, or what traits of yourself you see in me. I wish I could tell you about myself, how I love to write, or my unexplainable passion for acting. There's so much I want to say to you, but all I know is, gracias, abuela. Te amo.
The reason why I wanted to share my story is because a lot of times people don't want to talk about mental health, and especially don't want to talk about addiction. And today I will be talking about both. You see, I am an addict. And to be very specific, I am a crystal meth addict, and I also have issues with alcohol. Finding help with addiction, especially in a city like New York, can be very, very hard. And I hope that my story can give somebody an ounce of help, or, see that they're not alone. They're not the only ones dealing with this. Let's start at the beginning. Before I was, I guess, a true addict. So the first time I ever tasted Coke, I was 5 years old. You see, my father was a drug dealer. I remember walking into his room one day, he wasn't there, and I saw that he had these scales on top of his dresser. So I went to go look at the scales because, I was intrigued. But I saw a bunch of white stuff on it, and I was like, what the hell is that? So I took my finger and I rushed to the scale and I put it in my mouth. And I was like, whoa, what the hell is this? Needless to say, I did not like the flavor. It kind of reminded me of chalk, I guess. So anyways, fast forward to my young adulthood. This was hard, being gay and, having a father who was a drug dealer in and out of prison, and having a mother who had to deal with him, but still raise 5 boys. It was quite a challenge. I kept my head up. I promised myself that I would never do drugs because, drugs are terrible. I mean, look at how they made my father turn out. So at that time, I just excelled in school. I did really well. I got into a really good college. I came out to my family because I was so nervous, but my mother, thank God, bless her heart, may she rest in peace, accepted me for who I was and loved me and embraced me. And the rest of my family would slowly come to that. So anyways, I went off to college. On my 20th birthday, I smoked pot for the first time. I was like, wow, this is intense. Next thing I knew, I passed out. At that point, I don't know how I was just not a fan. So after that first whole pot experience, I went back to school. I continued, performing there at school and doing professional work outside of that. I remember then I lived in this really cool house with a bunch of other actors and students. And we used to always have these great parties all the time. So one of my friends introduced me to Coke. Now, that was fun. And from Coke, I proceeded to try crystal meth for the first time with some random guy I think I met on Grindr, or at the time I think it was called Manhunt. I juggled being a student, being a working professional actor, and juggling partying on the weekends, nothing too crazy. I'd have little stints here and there with my friends, or buddies as we used to call them, or still call them, I guess. That use kind of led me to, in one of these little, party stints of mine during school, led me to practice some unsafe sexual acts. Needless to say, because of those, that, I don't know if it's naivety or just idiocy, a condom broke, and a few weeks later, I was in the hospital dying of liver failure. Well, The reason why I was dying of liver failure was because I was infected with HIV at this time, and the HIV was attacking my liver, and I almost died. Luckily, I didn't. The doctors were able to save me, and I was in the hospital for about a week. At that time, it was really traumatic. I mean, it was the early 2000s, and my family was really freaked out, as was I. But I had to almost be really, really strong for my family because they were really naive about HIV. I mean, at least I was a student, and I remember taking a biology course in HIV, and I'm glad I had taken that course because I was informed at least as to, and I knew that I wasn't going to die anymore. It wasn't a death sentence anymore. Luckily, at this time, I was able to get on medications. But it was weird at first. I remember some of the people in my family were scared to even share a beverage with me because they thought that it was contagious. I'm like, it's not contagious. But people have come a long way since then. So once I got the HIV under control, I was able to go back to being a normal, I guess, semi-normal college student, taking classes, working professional regional gigs in the area, acting, going to New York for auditions and all that stuff, and, using again, like whenever I had the chance, like just for fun, whether it was an alcohol binge or a crystal meth binge, I loved it. Shortly thereafter, I booked a big Broadway national tour, so I went on tour. Wasn't able to finish college, even though I only had like 1 quarter left. I wish I had cared more about getting that degree then, but anyways, that's a whole nother story. So yes, I went on tour. It was amazing. I was in my early 20s. I had made tons of friends on tour. I was, of course, part of the party group. Drugs would just appear like that. It was like being a minor, very, very minor celebrity in every city we went to, Plus, we were making great money. None of us had obligations or families or kids. It was fantastic. We partied our faces off. It was a lot of fun, and I feel like that's when I start, especially me at least, started playing with fire a little too often, I liked it a little too much. But, during this period of my life where I was traveling and working, there would be stints where I'd go back to LA. This would probably be about the first time I ever shot up crystal meth. And that in itself was a whole nother experience because that was intense. My mind was blown. So shortly after tour life and traveling, I moved to New York. And for many, many years, I was able to work full time. At this time, I met my husband. I'm in New York. I'm working. I meet the man of my dreams. I have it all. We're able to live a life that, is very comfortable. We got to travel a lot. We got to see a lot of things. I got to live in a beautiful area of New York with an amazing apartment. In started creeping in the drug use again. It slowly started to get worse and worse. I would do it on the weekends or when my husband was out of town, which was a lot. So he'd go to visit his family a lot. So I was able to sneak in some, partying here and there without him really knowing. And believe me, he didn't catch on for years and years to come. It finally stuck. It only took me a decade or so. This was a few years into my marriage. I felt like I was missing something. Instead of filling it with therapy or help or couples counseling or something, I filled it with drugs. And to be more specific, crystal meth. I was snorting, I was smoking, I was shooting up. Yeah, it was pretty harsh and intense. And that's pretty much where everything started to spiral out of control. I started losing my jobs. I decided that it was time to stop using. I tried to stop on my own. I think I used tequila to try to get out of that first time. I guess a year later, I was back to using. It was pretty bad. And I was just making a lot of really bad decisions. So finally, my friends, I had a come to Jesus moment with them. And they got me into my first rehab. Believe me, though, I did not want to go. This was in the mountains of California somewhere. I was not happy. I was not ready to stop using. After 5 days, I climbed down that mountain in California with only my ID and a bag in my backpack and got the hell out of there. I hitchhiked down to the city center, ran to my bank, grabbed some cash, and took a train to LA, where I grew up and where my family's at. So luckily, that time I was able to, be with my family during this really troubling time for me and my drug use. My husband was kind of in the middle of everything and trying to figure out what to do. He just couldn't wrap his head around it. He had no idea what addiction looked like. For years to come, it was really, really hard for him to accept that I was an addict and how to deal with it. After a few years of trying to get sober and doing a lot of, rehab, outpatient programs, therapy, counseling, my own personal counseling. At the time, my husband would not want to go with me to therapy, or he didn't want to do like AA for family, but he was not really willing to do that because he didn't want to. He didn't feel he needed to. So there we are, juggling my addiction with our marriage and me working. I was not happy. I was doing a lot of stupid decision making at that time because I was, a lot of times I was high and making really, really irrational. There was a lot of irrational thoughts going on in my head because of my addiction and because of my drug use. I mean, some really crazy shit was going down. At this time, I think my husband finally had enough of me. He was done. So after a contract that I went to do a couple of years into my addiction, he asked for a divorce. And this was about, 9 years into our relationship. Apparently he had met somebody else. And he decided to leave me because he said he slowly fell out of love with me, because every time I would use or have to go to rehab or, get caught using, he said a little bit of every time that happened, a little bit of his love just slipped away, and finally it was gone. And he was ready to move on. And my heart was completely crushed. I was destroyed. And what did I decide to do? Yep, you guessed it. I went and got high. Yes, I continued to use and work and use and work and use. At this time, I also decided that it would be a great idea to go back to school. So there I am, juggling my drug addiction, my full-time drug addiction with my full-time job and a full-time course load as a student. Dumb. It was not easy, but I got through it slowly. Not great. I didn't do great, but I got through it. At this time, I decided it's time for me to go to rehab, like real rehab. So I checked myself into a rehab. This is, I'd say, probably the first time that it was actually my choice. And it was fantastic. And let me tell you, if there was like, a diploma or honors program for rehab, I would have been on it. I aced everything. I did so well at rehab. They loved me. So I went to rehab on winter break. And then I checked out of rehab right before school started. So I literally didn't even have a break. I just went back to work and back to school. Shortly thereafter, using again. It didn't work because I wasn't doing any kind of real supplemental work to keep me from using. I kept relapsing. And then shortly after, I decided that I couldn't live here anymore. I couldn't handle this life anymore. So I tried to commit suicide. That's when I ended up in the psychiatric ward. That kind of really scared me. But I got out and I continued to, again, still use, because I like I said, I wasn't doing AA. I wasn't doing anything to help me besides a little bit of counseling and, some outpatient rehab stuff that was super easy. And I wasn't really taking seriously because I was going to school full time and working full time and dealing with a divorce. So I guess you think after trying to kill myself and rehab multiple times, that I would finally get it. I didn't. I continued to use and I continued relapsing. School was getting in the way of my drug addiction. But somehow I still kept at it and I was doing okay. Pretty much getting all A's and B's while I was in school. But work suffered for sure. And then I got let go. I lost my job that I had for 5 years. And that was that was hard. My job and the people, my friends that I had there were like my second family. They meant a lot to me. I took a trip. I think I traveled the world a little bit. I got out of the city, came back and continued to use. And then pandemic. This kind of forced me to really reevaluate things. I felt like my brain was deteriorating, like literally, like I feel it like breaking. At this point, I decided to move back or with family on the West. I'm so glad I did because I needed them. I needed them for support to get me through school. They gave me a place I felt safe. But I continue to use. But let me tell you, it did not last long. Once my brother figured out that I was using, he pretty much kicked me out, gave me an ultimatum, either drugs or us, your family. And luckily I chose my family. I'm glad I did, because my brother knew how terrible drugs, had ruined our family's life. Had just a few years prior, got through our father, who, like I said, used to be a drug dealer. Well, he continued his own games when he got deported to Mexico. And guess what happened in Mexico? He was murdered because he was, I guess he stepped on the wrong people's toes. And that was a huge loss for us. My brother didn't want to lose me the way he lost our father. And so he wasn't going to put up with my really terrible behavior. And I'm glad he did. So here I am today, a few months after that. I'm sober today. I've really committed myself to not only therapy and counseling, but also the AA program. AA has definitely kept me in a right frame of mind. And I'm so grateful to those guys and that brotherhood and sisterhood that we have. So I hope that my story can inspire, even if it can just inspire one person to go and get help, whether it's, seeing a doctor or a psychiatrist or a therapist or a counselor, or checking out AA or CMA or whatever NA programs that you think if you're an addict, check them out, because the friendships that you build in those rooms are freaking awesome. I've been consistent. I've been seeing my therapist. I've been really committed to the program, and I haven't used. So I'm going to continue on I'm going to continue on that road, and I'm going to give it all I have. But obviously I have a purpose here, and I'm going to live my life to the fullest, and I hope you will too.
So why this story? Why talk about all of these little pieces of me and my queerness and my identity? Why this, and why is it worth telling? So part of what I mentioned in my story is the importance of sort of normalizing queer narratives to the public and to all of the baby gays that are going to be seeing them and sort of feel validated by it. And that is a big, huge part of it. But I think another part of it, and a part of the journey that I've been going on with my identity, is being able to feel validated myself and live in my queerness, even though we're living in such a weird time when it's really hard to be around other people. And so I think being able to write these stories down and sort of explore the history of myself and come to understand myself better, that there's this sense of validation that comes out of it, and just feeling comfortable enough to share them is validating in itself, and also comfortable enough to know that I have this new understanding of myself. And I think there's a lot of power in that, and it's kind of really special. And so that's part of why I'm here and why I'm doing this. Whenever I finish writing something, be it a paper, a play, whatever, my least favorite part is giving it a title. Reducing it down to one line, something witty and concise, without being too vague or irrelevant. And so trying to label myself is an absolute train wreck. For now, we'll just stick with queer, but even getting to the point of saying that has been a journey. Let's start in 2018. I moved to New York City for college.
My friend group at the time, Nerds 2.0 of Maria's Tower, made this alignment chart, and on one axis was gay, bi, and straight. They originally placed me in the straight column, and at this point in my life, 18 years old, I'm all of a sudden somehow able to tell myself and my friends that I was bi-curious. As I look back now, I'm always asking myself when I knew, when I started to understand, when I even had an inkling. Obviously, moving and immersing yourself in a new place with new people is really freeing, but it's something that's been ever present, just hidden, maybe, waiting for the right day to come out and scream, aha. Actually, coming out was truly something else. I drafted a tweet maybe a year or two ago about how I love that coming out isn't such a thing anymore. I noticed girls I went to high school with just popping up with girlfriends all of a sudden, and I realized that was a thing. I could just find my person and I wouldn't really have to come out at all. That, of course, is much easier said than done, especially as an anxious, really busy, inexperienced human being who had absolutely no idea what the fuck she was doing. So I found myself grappling with this idea of coming out more publicly to my personal world. A handful of people already knew for various reasons, but the majority didn't seem to be keyed in to my queerness at all. As we were getting closer to Pride, to June, I told myself I had to figure it out. I had this feeling that if I didn't tell people, I was living inauthentically, being disingenuous, almost lying to some of the most important people I knew. I understand now that my identity doesn't really concern those people, but at the time, it really, really felt important to do something like this, to own up to who I am. So I made this post about Pride on social media at the end of June. Nothing crazy, just something to acknowledge our Black and brown LGBTQ+ siblings, and then add in a little pretty happy this month to be kind of pretty gay at the end. Something about this felt so much easier than having to burden people individually. I could send myself out into the world, and people could engage with it however they chose to. In hindsight, this maybe wasn't my favorite choice, but one of the moments I felt most secure, most comfortable in my queerness, actually followed that coming out. A teacher turned friend texted me about it. I don't know if I've ever felt such love in a text before. She said she loved me and was proud of me, and I have this weird thing with people saying that. Like, when a lot of people say they're proud of me, it doesn't really mean anything to me, but there are a select few folks whom an expression of pride means quite literally everything to me, and she is absolutely one of them. Another part of the message was wondering if people knew, and maybe she just didn't. That wasn't the case, but after that I grappled for a long time with the way I chose to come out. I thought I was keeping this burden on myself, but maybe there is something really sacred about sharing something of your identity with the people you care about. It was terrifying to think about having to breach that conversation with people, so I copped out, and I resorted to social media. I still stand by my fuck having to come out at all mindset, but I'll always wonder what another way might have looked and felt like. Since then, I've spent a lot of time understanding what I like to call the history of my queerness. A lot of that processing has involved writing, journaling, making voice memos, anything I can do to record those thoughts. So, I wrote this letter for a project in 2020. It was supposed to be for someone who would never receive it. So as someone does in 2020, I chose to grapple with some nice big questions about identity. To the girl in the green jumpsuit. There's no way you'll ever remember me. Just another cat to herd, buried among 500 men in vintage army fatigues. But I will always remember the way that you moved with a purpose, smiled in a moment of success, breathed a sigh of relief when we wrapped for the day. Your energy radiated from across the airfield. A month later, and I saw you again. Only 17 of us to her this time, and you were tasked with babysitting us for the day. I listened intently as you chatted with the other extras, never quite having the guts to pipe in. A connection in my head that could never materialize. We broke for dinner, and the self-imposed segregation was immediate, but we just so happened to cross paths on our way out of the room. You tripped on a bump in the floor, and I was the only one to catch it. You dared me not to laugh. I laughed. We shared a smile and a fleeting moment. It would be too easy to say it was love. You're just the one I've thought about for a year, never understanding where the fascination stemmed from, why I still thought about your smile, your eyes, your energy, the way you moved. You might just be the first girl I ever loved. Damn, it feels really weird to hear that out loud. And to know that I'm the one saying it. The word first is a tricky one. And I don't really know how true it is, but this was a feeling like no other. At least like no other my somewhat consciously queer self had experienced. Were there loves before? I think so. I can't confirm, but I think so. I've been able to mark those sort of turning points in my consciousness of my identity, like the girl in the green jumpsuit. Watching the French film Portrait of a Lady on Fire is another really marked turning point. But now, sometimes I look back to high school and I just have to ask myself how the fuck I didn't know sooner. I was a huge theater kid in high school, and I guess I still am. My sophomore year, I did a musical called The Robber Bridegroom, and there was a scene where we had to make up characters to be townspeople. Naturally, my best friend and I decide that we'll be a lesbian couple, and our fellow townspeople called us gal pals and lesbians. My memory provides no explanation for this, but there we were, pretending to be a couple on stage. Might I say projecting much? Then the next year, we did a play called She Kills Monsters. It was about a girl finding her younger sister's Dungeons and Dragons module after she died. The girl then plays through the quest and learns about who her sister really was, which happened to be a closeted lesbian. And you guessed it, I played the lesbian younger sister. This is arguably my favorite role I've ever played, but not necessarily because it was gay. I did, though, make the choice to wear a rainbow bracelet for the character, and I loved that it talked about some really important issues. Now, this alone is not so crazy, but at some point during the show, my best friend and I, yes, the same best friend from before, both realized we had only ever had stage kisses, never real ones. And so in the dressing room, with our whole cast in the room, we decided we would be each other's first real kiss. It was just a peck. It didn't really mean much, but it did in fact happen. And I think friendships formed in theater always ride this fine line between platonic and romantic, and this one always stayed platonic, but I look back knowing it might have been more in my head and my heart. These little revelations and discoveries have been so important in trying to understand who I am. But even more so, being able to write them down and say them aloud holds a power that is unmatched. It feels kind of weird that I have no problem telling these stories, sharing this little piece of me, but trying to justify to myself why they're worth sharing is a whole other story. There's really nothing that's so special about these last few minutes that I've shared, so why is it something worth telling? After a lot of thinking, what it really boils down to for me is the normalization of queer narratives. A big part of my self-reflection this past year has involved trying to consume as much queer media as I can. Movies, TV shows, books, and especially plays. So much of the standard commercial queer story that gets produced is about trauma, about coming out, about being shamed and bullied. And those stories are so important, but there's something to be said about normalizing queer people. The gritty parts about figuring out who you are, having no fucking clue what you're feeling and what it means. Just living your life as someone who loves a little differently. And I think that's really all it is. Queer stories have been crazy important for helping me feel valid in my queerness, so all I can really do is share a piece of mine and work towards amplifying the voices of others as a theater maker and a queer human being. Because label or no label, that's what I am. Just kinda pretty queer.